Good afternoon, and welcome to It Didn't Sound Like That in the studio. With me is Lindsay Dryden, director and producer of Lost and Sound, Kate Hopkins, sound editor, and Andrew Wilson, re-recording mixer, and I'm Pip Norton. First of all, before we play the introductory clips, if you just give me a sort of a show of hands at who our audience is today. How many of you are directors, producers, editors, sound professionals? If you'd like to leave now. Okay, if we could just start off with those first two clips then, please.
For me, inside my head, music has always been three-dimensional. It's had an architecture. And if you lose an ear, that goes. Music becomes completely flat. And the difference is akin to the difference between an architectural drawing and an actual piece of architecture. Beforehand, I would listen to buildings. Now I listen to an architectural drawing. I can see what the drawing is attempting to express, but I don't get the volume. Now music is simply a flat drawing on a single plane. I'm keen, no, not keen, I'm absolutely desperate to find out what happens next.
Looking confused. You had all of them. Excuse me.
Are you the next Eminem? Are you the next Usher? At a time, in our heads, we were it.
We took the 13-hour bus journey down and we were quite confident. We're like, yeah, we've got something really original.
In comes the one with its tongue sharp as thorns and artist scorn. My style's immaculately bastard born. I'm hungry for this far more than a starving Labrador. I'm someone you amateurs can't ignore. The carnivore. Young and creative, translate this in Aramaic. It's sacred, I'll leave you slay like you're Goliath. And I'm David.
When we arrived at the audition, I realised that we were drowning M&Ms in a sea of Ushers, as everyone else was pimped out in this hip-hop gear. And so we stood out.
I was used to rapping in little pubs and clubs, nothing with that much importance or attention.
And there was 3 A&Rs, but you'd probably say judges now. You know, this was before X Factor. They looked up and they were kind of like, And as soon as we started saying, oh, we're B-production, talking in a Scottish accent, the vibe just changed horribly. They were like squinting their eyes like, looking at each other like,
Thank you. These are all examples of featured documentaries. And in this day, the markets range from cinema release to TV, DVD, and download is a big, important part these days. But they all require a different approach. It's fairly obvious. When you go to the cinema, part of the experience is the big sound, sort of, you know, that you come to expect. And when you actually mixing a theatrical documentary, you ideally want to mix it in somewhere which will actually match this space, so you can hear what you're doing and you can hear what it's going to sound like. The reason we called it Didn't Sound Like That in the Theatre is because you hire this lovely dubbing theatre, big full spec, and do the mix, and you're really happy with it. And then you've got a few niggles, you go home, listen to it on your laptop, and shocked at how different it is. Obviously, there's going to be a big difference in the speaker size, and everybody knows this, but it's actually when it's demonstrated to you, the difference is quite stark. Having said that, I'm not quite sure how well this is going to work, but what we've done is a demo, taken the frequency response of a laptop and measured that, and then applied it to some sound effects. So if we just play the laptop demo 1, please. Okay, as well as the bass going, the high mid frequencies tend to sort of get boosted on laptops, which gives it quite that distinctive sound. If you're mixing in somewhere that doesn't have quite the frequency response of a full spec dubbing theatre, and you're not getting sort of the bassy, sort of beefy thing that you want, the tendency is to actually boost the bass, and sort of, you know, till you can sort of feel more happening. However, you have to be really aware of the implications when you then, if you're aiming at a theatrical release, go and play it in a cinema. If you could just play the second demo, please. Suitably horrible. But it's a very, very crude way to show what everybody intuitively knows, but still comes as a complete shock. The way to sort of approach it really is very obviously dependent upon your budget, but the more that you're aware of these differences, then the better prepared you are to actually follow through and get the ideal mix for your film for each stage of the process. Andrew, you had some specifics that you've got.
Yeah, I've got the same sequence here. This is sound and vision, and this is from a feature that we did for Disney. It's African cats fighting. The 3 clips I'm going to play. The first one is just the effects, actually. I had to go with what I had left of the session, but this is just the effects mix. This is at full theatrical levels. I mean, you can see from this waveform that's here that the difference between, can you see my cursor there? The difference between the very quiet bits and the very loud bits is quite big on that scale. And I'll just play the clip. It's lions having a fight. This is at so this is at cinema levels with no compensation at all. So I'll just play this little clip. Oops, if I can figure this out. Here we go. So pretty exciting and dynamic. And if you watch that in a big cinema on a big screen with a proper sound system, it's proper scary. And I'm told, we mixed this at Halo in central London. I'm told that in the coffee bar on Wardle Street, they could hear it there. It was great. You had to be there. So that's that one. The next version I've got is the same sequence. This has got music and effects, music and narration on it, but it's the same sequence. And this one, this is at TV levels, and you can see if I switch between those two waveform displays, that one's really big and dynamic. The TV one we have to limit to -10, and the total range between the loudest bits and the quietest bits has come down a lot. Let me just run this one for you.
Layla is the lioness's leader. Despite her injuries, she puts herself between the invaders and the precious cubs. Inspired by Layla, the other lionesses attack.
So you can see there we've got much less range between the loudest and the quietest, but it's still quite exciting. And if you play that out of a TV, sort of modern, one of those flat TVs, it sounds pretty good. It's still punchy and it's still exciting. And it's sort of in proportion to the screen size change. The third version I have, so if we look at these progression of these waveforms, this is the theatrical levels, this is the TV levels. Now, I've got another version which I made which sounds really good coming out of the built-in speakers in a MacBook Air. But those speakers are, this diameter, they've got a total movement of about 1 millimeter. Whereas in a cinema, you've got, 8, 15 or 18-inch speakers that can move backwards and forwards a mile. You know, it's a whole different thing. So the laptop version, the range between loud and quiet is about 0. It's all the same volume. And if I play it in this room, it's going to sound pretty grim. I'll play it anyway, but it's going to sound pretty awful. But trust me, on a laptop, it sounds great. But what we're really getting at here is if you mix it on a laptop, or you mix it for a laptop, and then you take it to the cinema, you're going to really, really upset people, and they're all going to leave, because it might actually be louder than the adverts. Unlikely. Nothing's louder than the adverts. Let me just run this one. This one's a bit louder, guys.
Layla is the lioness's leader. Despite her injuries, she puts herself between the invaders and the precious cubs. Inspired by Layla, the other lionesses attack.
So, pretty graphic. I mean, you can see from that last one, it's all the same volume. There is no change between loud and quiet. It's sort of exciting. It actually works on a laptop or it works out of headphones and stuff, but if you were to take that to a cinema and play it, you'd pretty quickly lose your audience because it would be relentlessly loud. There is no contrast between loud and quiet. One other thing I'll just sort of bung in, which we'll come on to a bit later when we talk about sound content and sound design and what have you, is that Lions clip and also the Thunder and Lightning thing we had before are both shot 100% mute. There is not a single frame of sync audio in any of that, which is why it's sort of an interesting thing to consider what elements you've got in there to get the message across to your audience, but we'll come back to that.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Lindsay, how aware of this difference in deliverables were you when you started out?
I think it depends on the project, and with something like Lost in Sound, we made it independently, with independent funding, the idea being to sell it after it was finished. And when that happens, you don't have a set of deliverables to give to somebody. It's kind of up to you, which is a bad idea and worth establishing from the beginning. So we intended, I think, to go with a theatrical mix and a TV mix and kind of let both of them work in two different ways. But, you know, people watch things on their phones. And this particular film is a film about sound and sound design and music. And so it's quite frustrating to hear how things change. But, yeah, we didn't have fixed deliverables in mind from a broadcaster with something like Lost in Sound. And you just always should from the beginning.
Okay. What advice would you give to somebody starting out on a theatrical project?
Think of your budget and double it. That'd be the first thing. Maybe a bit more than that. I think people don't really get the difference in scale between a TV mix, even a good elaborate TV mix, and what you actually need for a theatrical mix. I mean, even if you're doing very high-end TV with a fair bit of budget, when people view the film, they're at home, they've probably got a washing machine on, they've probably got a laptop or an iPad or something on their lap. They've got a load of distractions, whereas in the cinema, there's none of that, apart from a bit of rustling of popcorn buckets. There is no distraction, there's nothing else to do, and every single sound is so open to scrutiny that what you really, really need is time. There's the famous three-way thing, fast, good, and cheap. There's three variables. You can have any two, but you can't have the other one. So you can have it fast, and you can have it good, but it won't be cheap. You can have it fast, and you can have it cheap, it'll be no good. What people really need to budget for, what really need to allow for, is the time taken to get the detail that you actually want into the thing. There's a thing it used to be on the front page of the Skywalker Sound website that says, sound is 50% of the motion picture experience. And it easily is. I mean, I think it's slightly more, actually, because you can watch it with your eyes shut and still know what's going on, whereas if you watch it with the sound off, you don't totally get it. It's a shame that sound isn't 50% of the motion picture budget, but that's what people really need to allow for, is time to get the detail into the storytelling that they're trying to achieve.
I think my advice would be to get that time in, is to talk to your sound post person as soon as possible, before you start shooting even. I'm always really glad to actually have a chat with people before they go out. I am not a location recordist, but I know how I'm going to deal with things when they actually come to me, and can offer some advice towards that. And also, through the edit process, I was more than happy to actually interact with the editor. And personally, I'm always happy to feed sound effects into the edit, because I appreciate how much that actually does help the edit along. And if you're thinking about sound at that early stage, then, well, it makes our life a lot easier at the end, but also it helps with the rhythm of the film as well. One of the clips on there was the hip-hop hoax, and that had animation, and I'd done previous documentaries with animation in, and learned a lot from that, in that the animators would give us an animated scene, and then we would track lay it, and just find that it had no rhythm whatsoever. And in the end, we did it how they actually do animation for feature dramas, and give the animator a soundtrack to actually animate to. And it actually worked so much better from that. And say just as early as possible that you can actually talk to us.
The other thing that I would add is that the thing that people don't seem to put into their sound process, particularly at the post end these days, is trust. They don't seem to totally... we do this for a living, day in, day out, and hopefully, well, if you've been doing it for enough years, you probably know what you're doing if you're still paying your mortgage. And I think there's not enough people understand that. Is there anybody here who's a commissioner? Okay. Because it seems to me that when people are editing, and I'm sure the editors will identify with this, that you do an edit and you've got to send it off to the commissioners or the executive producers, who are then going to sort of pronounce the changes they want making, and nobody seems to understand that it's going to have some sound posts, so that bit of dialogue you can't quite hear will be better, and the scratch narration will be better, and there will be some sound effects and a proper mix. I don't think people totally get that, so if we could get people to at least trust us a bit more.
There is that fear when you're editing, is that if there is a mute sequence, which quite often, most of the films I work on, they're almost all entirely mute, of not leaving a sequence to live, just stay as it is, because it's, there's no sound on it, so it has to be shorter, this is never going to work. And it will happen, and what I was going to go on to say is what can happen, it gets filled with music, because music is one track, it can be put on it and it covers everything. And then what tends to happen is that is stuck with the picture, and everyone loses confidence, going, you can't drop that music because we've had it all the way through the edit. No, you can drop it, because there's going to be a whole lot of layers of sound, and it will all work and it will live on its own. It doesn't need to have music all the way through it. And that's why it's important to talk to, I think, me as a sound editor early on. And I can, as Pip said, I can feed sound effects to editors, and ones that I would actually use rather, editors haven't got all the time to go through and choose something going, really, you want that same sound effect again and again? So I can give a kind of... Yeah.
I think somewhere in a parallel universe, right at this moment, there's another talk going on which is called It Didn't Sound Like That in the Cutting Room, which is a slightly different discussion. The old avid ears problem. People get to the mix and they hear the full-on soundtrack and they thought, yeah, but, when it was in the cutting room and it had the music from Gladiator on it, it sounded much better.
I think people find it much harder, kind of from a director's point of view, and not as a commissioner, but, having watched those wondrous meetings, people find it much more difficult to imagine sound than they do imagine picture. You can leave a lot of blank spaces in a film, and actually that's quite enjoyable to watch because you get to fill them in yourself. But when there's sound holes, it's much more frightening to people because it's just that much harder to imagine, and also for directors to convey what it is that they want to be there.
I think it is a lack of confidence. I think
Yeah.
there was a time, quite a few years ago when people got used to seeing sequences that were a bit mute and, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I think because there's, a lot of echelon of people to go through and they don't always know the process, that people get scared of leaving things a bit mute. But you have to know, it will happen. And it can affect the edit because things are thrown in just to make everything right, and it's not necessarily and you're stuck with it because people higher up the level have heard it like that, have gone, oh, it's fine, it's going to be covered in, it is usually music. And it's difficult to come back from that.
Also, when you mentioned budgets before, a lot of places and individuals will not quote for deliverables when they're quoting on a film, just because it is that how long is your piece of string. And you can think that it's sort of going to be absolutely fantastic. You've got all of this time to mix your film, and then you've got sort of, if not more, at the end to make all these deliverables. If you think your film is 90 minutes long, and you've got 5 different versions to do it, you just have to sort of add the running times up with actually sort of looking at the remixing and the various stems that you've got to be producing, and also exactly.
Can you pop this one on the monitor? Okay, this is from that Cats film. This is. Can you still hear me if I stand up? These tracks here, the top 6. That's the mix that was delivered. That's the mix you hear in the cinema. That's 6 mono tracks. That's the 5.1 master. That's just the picture. These are all 6 track. 1 mono, 6 track, 6 track, 6 track, 6 track, stereo, 6 track, stereo. Every single one of those is a required deliverable for the international markets. Every single one of those is at least, very least, a real-time pass. More often than not, it's a mixed pass. But of course, when they budgeted the time, they budgeted, mix, and then deliverables, a couple of days.
So it seems like producers need to be here knowing this.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a huge amount of work there. You can't quite see from that what that is, but there's a separate effects mix, separate music mix, separate backgrounds, separate Foley, separate. There's the near field mix, which is the sort of DVD mix. Then there's the TV mix, which is even more contained in stereo. There's something else.
But on television,
loads
I
of
think
them.
now there's more time spent in dubbing theatre doing deliverables than there are doing the pre-mix and the final mix.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's extraordinary. And then, but that is sometimes just bolted on the end, and it's a bit of a shock that they seem to be mixing for a week and a half when it was only really a 3-day mix.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
That's because you've got all these territories, and everyone wants something just slightly different.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to deliver for,
thing.
if in the National Geographic or Discovery Channel, then they all have their 5.1 pannings and everything as well. And so the best thing to do is just sort of keep it as flexible and keep it as separate as you possibly can for later, if you do have to go back and get some more money off them to actually make the deliverables that they require further down the line.
Yeah, I'd say if anybody is talking to, especially, is anybody here from National Geographic? Good, safe. Okay, if you're talking to National Geographic, then you definitely need to negotiate doing a separate mix for them and for us, because they've got some nutters. They've got some really crazy idea on what works. They've got this belief that if you deliver a 5.1 mix, the only thing in the centre channel should be the narration, or there shouldn't be anything else in the centre channel, because I think somebody thought, then we get a free M&E, we just lose the centre channel, we've got an M&E. Well, they get an M&E anyway. But you end up with a thing where everything's detached. Oh, you're allowed to have sync dialogue in the middle, aren't you? But only if it's on screen.
One of them
yeah,
not.
and if you cut away, they've got to go into the left and right speakers. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. It sounds completely stupid. Even coming out of a TV set, it sounds stupid. But so, National Geographic, avoid.
There is a problem with cinemas as well, in that obviously if they're a Dolby spec, then they should be Dolby spec. They also then have the problem of levels, because there is the way that you mix a film is that you set up your speakers at a certain level, which is measured, and then you use your ears to mix to that level, so that anybody going in any cinema should hear it at that level. Except that you go in a cinema and the projectionist has turned it down a bit because everything's coming in a bit loud. So you've done this wonderful mix to the levels that it should be, and then it's far too quiet. That is a major problem. It's an especially problem with multiplexes because the thinness of the walls, they actually turn it all down.
They don't have a projectionist either.
No, they don't have
It's kind of done
projectionists.
almost remotely.
Yeah.
I was amazed to find in Bristol there's a multiplex in the middle of town. It's got 13 screens and one projectionist for all of the screens. And he comes in the morning at 10 o'clock and he goes into each room and he clicks return. He goes to the next one, return. And everything's programmed. Not just the movies, but the curtains and the lights and the music and it's all completely pre-programmed. He said the highlight of his week is when a bulb blows.
It doesn't make it all right.
Bizarre.
And if you do have a film that you are taking around to festivals, when you do that test screening, always go down to, don't just play the opening shots, go down to where somebody's actually speaking and play that part there. And if that part works, the rest of it will work.
Yeah.
But
Always pick up your chance to do a tech check beforehand, particularly with audio, because
yeah,
every single cinema sounds utterly different. Especially for festivals, because you're not necessarily in a cinema all the time. You might be in, you know, a different kind of screening room, and it can be very variable.
Those rooms do vary a lot, but that in a way allies to the problem that you have with broadcast television, in that if everybody had a standard television, you know, a sort of government issue TV, which you could only play at government issue volume, and you could only have approved appliances working in the background at the same time, our jobs would be a lot easier. But unfortunately, they're not. We have no control over how loud people listen. I don't listen particularly loud, but
the lowest common denominator in a way. I mean, because it's got to work on, you know, not a fancy hi-fi. It's got to work on something which is may have one or maybe two speakers.
I do know that, you know, I can be. In fact, there was a situation recently where I was watching. What was the last Tarantino film? Django Unchained. It's not a very quiet film. It's pretty full on. But I was watching that at home in my home cinema. But during a quiet bit, I was rather annoyed because the neighbour's kid was playing Peppa Pig. And it completely spoiled the moment of Tarantino. We don't have control over that. You do get that in the cinema. You know, you can be in one screen and then the next screen's got a blockbuster going. In an ideal world, in posh cinemas, sorry.
What do you recommend for festivals, given the sort of varied conditions of festivals around the world? What would you recommend you do?
Well, you just have to have a really great theatrical mix and check everywhere, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a good mix in the first place, by, you know, investing in, it's not the toys, it's the boys and girls, but it's not, you know, just going somewhere that's rammed full of technology, and you know, I know, well, we all know people, there may even be some in this room who, if pressed, might admit that they went somewhere because the coffee was good, or they had a specially dishy runner or whatever. Whereas actually, you know, you should be investing in the right people. If you've got a really good mix to start with, you're starting with a head start. But if you take it to the festival, as Pip was saying, try and get a preview of what it's going to be like, and not a loud bit. Listen to a quiet bit.
Yeah, nearly every festival will ask you to be there in advance, and you know, you'll play a bit, you'll check the picture, you'll check the lighting, you'll check the brightness, and some festivals can't do much about what they've got, and some can. So just, you know, play around as much as you can.
But generally,
Putting different mixes on one tape?
No.
Why not?
Because it gets really complicated.
or even worse.
Or sometimes they played two mixes at once.
Yeah.
And you also, you know, everyone's got limited resources, so it would be nice to have, you know, different versions to see what works in different cinemas. But also, you're not necessarily going to know what's going to work best. You just have to try and work best in the environment that you're in. It's also quite fun, because sometimes you hear things that you just haven't heard before anywhere else, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Not always.
I would say, sorry, go on.
I was going to say that the one thing, if you do go to a festival and you get a chance to preview it, I mean, you're not just previewing the audio, you're previewing what it's going to look like. The things there's two things you can be pretty sure they can tweak, although actually one of them less so, which is focus and volume. they might not be able to tweak the colour balance of the projector and stuff like that, but they ought to be able to focus it, although increasingly they can't. Said multiplex with 13 screens has autofocus projectors, which is a really good idea until somebody put holes in the screen to let the sound out, and then the projector doesn't quite know where to focus, so it's all slightly soft. But the one thing they can tweak is they can adjust the volume. Yeah. And if you go to a preview, they're probably playing through if it's a sort of seats more than about 50 people, then the chances are they'll have a Dolby processor in there. It's got volumes 1 to 10. It's meant to be set at 7 if it's been correctly lined up to Dolby levels. But the range between 0 is 0, and 10 is take your head off. So they've got some range. And when you do your test, you ought to be able to say to them, you're going to have to play this one at even 8 or whatever. And the guy should write it down and he should do it. Because
the biggest problem I've ever come across is in festivals and things like that is not necessarily the level, but what speaker things are coming out of. There's been lots of time, especially when 5.1 first came in, ended up with very weird things like the surround coming out of the front and left and right going the wrong way. And that's really awful.
There was one where at the last minute their centre...
check when you go in there and just make sure at least...
We did one where at the last minute the centre speaker had broken. And the only thing they could find to replace it with was the projectionist's guitar amp.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, it was probably a great guitar amp. It was pretty rocky, but it's not the sort of thing you want on a natural history documentary dialogue track.
Sound editors and
You
mixers
don't want that Hendrix sound.
If you, understandably, budgets do vary, and if you cannot afford to go to a Dolby lined-up theatre or whatever, then and you are mixing in somewhere that you're not sure about, or your mixer is not sure about the room or anything, then as filmmakers you've generally got quite a good reputation, relationship with your local cinemas. And in the past, when I've been mixing in a room that I haven't known and hadn't had sort of complete confidence in, obviously sort of my knowledge will sort of lead me particularly in one direction, but just to double check. It's really good to try and get a morning and just do a test screening. Ask them if you can get in the morning and actually listen to it in a cinema, and then go back and make any changes that you would feel from that. You might be surprised by sort of how it sounds, and might need to sort of do one or two things. The tendency, if you're getting a feature doc mixed by somebody who's not used to mixing for cinema, is that, so say cinema, as you saw from the waveforms, has large dynamic range. If you're not used to that, or not mixing in an environment that would normally sort of take that, then you can find that your film is sort of quite flat. And so it's worth going and watching the whole film in a friendly cinema, rather than just sort of test bits and pieces. Just see how the shape is going, because, say, the shape does go very differently.
Also, in fact, I generally find that cinemas, if you can actually talk to the projection guy, they're usually quite delighted to have somebody, like, it's just a change from the monotony of going return.
Talking about that, would you then... And I know some sound people get a bit irritated, but, I want to listen to the mix 5 times. On the TV, a near-field mix, on a laptop, in the cinema. It's, it does get a bit time-consuming, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. But going back to what we were saying earlier, those should all actually be separate mixes. Therefore, they should be monitored.
Yes.
As separate mixes, yeah. I mean, it's quite
environments.
risky to just trust to the gadgets and the plugins to try and contain that range, because a lot of the time you'll get away with it, but sometimes it'll go horribly wrong. And if you're in a decent facility which is correctly lined up, I mean, there was there have been incidents where people have moaned. Viewers are writing in saying, we can't hear the words. And I think there's a factor in that, which is, I think a lot of the programs, which certainly the ones that have had more publicity about we can't hear what he's talking about, the problem has been, I bet, that they mixed it in a nice big room, nice and loud, in 5.1. And I reckon when they were doing the mix, their centre channel was probably too loud. So they didn't put enough dialogue into the middle. And when you boil that down to stereo and people play it out of their whatever Panasonic flat telly, you can't hear the words. So you've got to check all your mixes. Even if it looks right.
The problem we've got on TV is a lot of 5.1 mixes which haven't been mixed down properly to stereo, because that's generally how they're going to go out. And
one problem, I mean, I certainly much prefer mixing in surround because it's way more fun, and you can, it's why we do this stuff. But and it does take a bit longer and stuff like that. But not many people are going to hear that, certainly not on broadcast. But where people are starting to get interested in it is the after sales DVD, Blu-ray for home cinema. And there was a thing I did 2 or 3 years ago. I did there were two natural history series being done in parallel, and one was only done in stereo, and the other was done in 5.1 for various reasons, mostly I think to do with internal BBC politics and co-producers, which is nothing to do with me. But if you look at those two products on Amazon and look at the user reviews, on one of them, people are saying, it was amazing, it's like the Pacific Ocean was crashing through my lounge. And the other one, they're saying, it looks amazing, but why is it only stereo? So I think there is a demand for it, but are there any production managers in? I'm just making sure that we just don't offend anybody. Great. I think the problem is that the production managers don't want to spend the money. They sort of think, well...
But it's that initial spending one, because what happens, it tends to have to be done after the fact, and it's actually cheaper to do, and better to do the 5.1 mix at the time when you're doing the pre-mixing, and then do the stereo.
Yeah.
The stereo mix is important because that's what goes down, that's what people first see.
Kate and I
if you haven't done the 5.1 mix and do it afterwards, then it's
Well, Kate and I both worked on Planet Earth, and the BBC said, anybody here from the BBC? So I like to check these things. Does anybody do anything?
I don't think this is a secret room.
Okay, no, but you've got to check, Oh, God. The BBC didn't want Planet Earth in 5.1. No, we're not having that. Stereo. But the co-producers were NHK in Japan. Anyone from NHK? No. And they did want 5.1. So they actually put a little bit more money into the post-budget, so that what we did was we pre-mixed in 5.1, and then we did the BBC broadcast mixes were done in stereo as boil-downs from the 5.1 stems, and it was delivered to worldwide as well. The plan was to deliver it as stereo, and then there was going to be an NHK delivery of 5.1 stems. But when Worldwide, who of course don't fund these things, they just sell it to people, they said, oh, we hear it's available in 5.1, can we have those? So they sort of blagged it for free, and I'm pretty sure Planet Earth is the biggest selling factual DVD ever. They've made millions.
That decision was made almost between us at the time.
Yeah. Just because we wanted to play.
We can do it, it's not going to take that much longer to do the pre-mixing in 5.1, but everyone else higher up.
It's just a bit more time. So sort of it slightly depends on rates. Bristol rates don't compare with Soho rates. Mind you, having just bought a pint round the corner, heck, Sheffield prices compare with Soho prices. Or where we went, they did anyway. Yeah. I would say, typically, certainly if we're talking like a 50-minute mute natural history documentary, we'd be looking at 2 days to pre-mix. This is for stereo. We'd be looking at 2 days to pre-mix, probably a day and a half to do the final mix, and maybe a sort of another day, shortish day to do all the delivery stuff. In 5.1, I think you'd add a pre-mix day, and I think you probably add 2 days in total. So you might go from...
It doesn't add a huge amount to the final mix.
No, the final mix doesn't really take any longer.
It just takes a little
I think
bit longer.
you might go from sort of 4 to 5 days in total up to 6 or 7 days.
It's not really that scarily different.
No.
technical.
Pretty much technical, yeah.
I think we did go through it, the various different ways of doing it, and starting with the 5.1 premixes just always seemed the best.
Yeah,
And the way you're starting, we've got everything there. Everything is big and as nice as you want it.
It's slightly silk burst styles here. If you start with something, if you start with the big thing, you've put all the detail in, you've put all the effort, it's very easy to then cram it into a small space. Whereas if you've got something that's designed to live in a small space and you try to make it a big thing, it just feels like a stretched thing.
So then in that situation, are you mixing for cinema first and then mixing down for TV, etc.?
If it's a theatrical job, then yes, you would do the cinema release mix first. And in fact, then there's not just one cinema release mix. I mean, on the African Cats one, we did DCP, Dolby Digital, DTS, and SDDS. So 4 passes to the...
When it comes to how dynamic you make a theatrical mix?
Assuming it's a Dolby licensed room and it's correctly calibrated and to spec, then how much pain you can take is probably the limit. I mean, there are some movies which infamously go for loud, big time. 300, I think, is generally reckoned to be possibly the loudest film ever, in that it's never quiet. And I bet if you look at that on the little waveform thing, it probably looks a bit like my laptop mix. It never shuts up. And a lot of those movies around that time, The Mummy, that was another one, just absolutely relentless.
Do you think it's changed since then? Do you think people have just gone, that was too much? Or was it,
I think
we just turned it down.
Yeah, I mean, well, another thing that is a slight problem is that if you're mixing a film and you know that it's going to be shown in multiplexes that are playing too quiet, you have the tendency to mix it so that it'll work when it's played too quiet, which is fine until someone plays it at the correct level. And then you get Armageddon.
Tweeting to a cinema in the middle of a film that's being played too quietly tends to make them turn it up straight away. I do that quite a lot.
that's what they're actually doing.
Is that not also reflective of trends in production music production for the last few years, where everybody just tries to make everything as loud as possible and waveforms just look like that, basically?
I think it is, and I think it's also it's partly because of that. It's almost the sort of advertising mentality that my product's got to be bigger, brighter, bolder, just more of everything. But I mean, I always try and compare. I think there's always a great analogy between anything to do with sound and food. And if you go for more, then actually all you end up with is the all-you-can-eat buffet, which, though it's sort of fun for the first few minutes, actually quite soon becomes a bit annoying. Whereas, alternatively, if you're going to try and eat 12 courses, you might go to Heston Blumenthal's and have 12 courses, all of which are quail's egg size, but it's an amazing thing. I think also
sound also comes into that fear of attention sort of span as well, and
Yeah.
and the tendency to fill in silences. And I mean, what I'd be say is not to be afraid of silences, but actually use them, which is why I said about watching your film in its entirety in a cinema, just to sort of see the shape of it and just see if it's it is all loud through and sort of just sort of flat, really. And that can get quite tiring, actually, to watch a sort of fairly flat production. Whereas if you've actually sort of got more shape into it and much more dynamic range, then you're going to do
yeah.
it.
If it's loud all the time, you can never make anyone jump. Whereas if you've got those big changes, it's way more interesting.
Should we take a short break and have a look at the clips before getting on to sound design?
Yes.
Yeah? If you could play...
They played us a tape of Beethoven symphony.
They played a Beethoven symphony. Said, "What is this piece of music?" It's orchestral. I didn't recognise it was Beethoven, but it just sounded like music underwater.
Lost in Sound, a feature doc I finished last year about deafness and music in the brain, and it's about what happens to people when they lose the ability to hear music ordinarily. All the 3 people in it are all into music in very intense ways, and so it follows them over about 2.5, 3 years as they try and get music back after they've lost their hearing. So the guy on the plane woke up one morning, one of his ears had stopped working, and all sound became horrendous for him, and he was a music critic. And the little you didn't see the little girl, but the first clip was a representation of what music sounds like to a small child who lost her hearing when she was 14 months old and has 2 cochlear implants now. And it was kind of the most accurate representation that apparently it's possible to make in the world using this incredible piece of software. So.
I've got one other clip that I'm going to play here. This is just sound only. So you can leave that picture up if you like. If you can play the audio off this one. Just to explain what this is a little montage of sound effects which are all designed to go together in a sort of radio play kind of way to create a scene. The trick is one of them is wrong. It's completely the wrong sound for the scene, but it works in the scene. And see if you can spot it. What will happen is gradually all the other sounds will disappear, leaving it completely on its own. It sort of shows you how what you hear isn't necessarily what you think you hear, but it might be what you want to hear. So have a little listen to this and see at what point you spot it. So just to prove a point, I'll just play that again. Okay, we've got frying eggs at the end there, but if I play it again and you listen to the rain, it's frying eggs. It was frying eggs all along. The problem is you hear the thunder, you assume that the next hissy noise has got to be rain, but it's not. And if I play it again, you'll hear frying eggs. So you get the idea.
Lindsay, when you were doing the sound design, how much were you working with composer, and how much was composed, and how much was sort of a sound person?
We had to tread quite carefully when it came to credits, actually, because the editor did some of the sound design. The first editor did some of the sound design. The second editor did some of the sound design. The composer did some of the sound design, and the sound designer and mixer did some of the sound design. And it was quite a messy process, actually, because it came in at different times all the way through, which is quite difficult to manage by the time you get to the mix, because there's kind of bits and pieces all over the place that
Yeah.
some people prioritise in their ears and some people don't. So it's a combination, really, of everybody who worked across, who had any impact on sound. And some of the sequences were very much designed in the kind of pre-production process by me to be sound sequences.
Yes.
And some just emerged that they had to be kind of during production.
Right. And so those sequences, sort of where it changes, were those sort of partly done in the edit and then sort of refined sort of through the process?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, those two were mostly done in the edit and then kind of tweaked towards the end.
Right.
But we kind of had to have them as early as possible because they had quite strong narrative impacts.
Yeah.
And we couldn't really have known the full shape of the film without knowing if they worked early on.
I mean, that is the thing about having a sound editor or someone supplying sound early
Yeah.
on, and then you'll know if things are going to work or not. I mean, especially with those sort of films that you've made, it's really important to know if this is going to actually work. If you're going to design sound for someone with tinnitus, you need to know that's going to actually come across.
Yeah.
I'm slightly curious in that there's some very impressive stuff. I mean, there's a couple of sequences that we saw there that I thought, God, that must have been miserable mixing that, because it's pretty intense. But presumably the drive was to get a sense of what the people feel to the viewer. But I wondered how much is that fixed with accuracy, and how much is it fixed with creating the impression? Just as I'm trying to make a storm here, but actually it's frying eggs.
Yeah.
Is the smoke and mirrors, or was it actually trying to be very factual?
It worked in several different ways, depending on who the experience belonged to. And so there was one sequence where, at the end, which some doctors asked us to change because they felt it was too intense and it would be frightening for people who were having that experience, but it was directly influenced by the people having that experience. And we agreed to soften it and make it gentler. And that was sort of based on people's testimony. How did they describe what they hear? They played us bits and pieces that sounded like what they were hearing. And there was other bits, like the Beethoven with the black and the white and the colour. And that was with this amazing piece of technology that University of Cambridge scientists have created. So you'd give somebody a hearing test, and you take the data from that hearing test, and they can put it into their software, whatever it is, secret recipe that they have, and it will output anybody's hearing profile, basically. And the more extreme your weird hearing is, your hearing loss is, the more extreme you'll hear that, the more extremely you'll hear that. And of course, we're all hearing it through our own ears, so you can't escape that. But that was very much based on kind of strong technical accuracy.
I'm curious because one of the most fascinating experiences I ever had during a mix was with a director who was truly deaf. I mean, like real proper deaf, not just hearing impaired. He was utterly deaf. And the first thing he said was he wanted a soundtrack that would work for deaf people and for hearing people. And I thought, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I had to get him to describe what he hears. And what was interesting, he said he can't hear anything, but he can sense when stuff changes. Yeah. And we proved it. I put some just line-up tone on the desk, and I faded it up really, really slowly. And he had no idea it was there. If I switch it off, he knew it had changed.
Absolutely.
We ended up with the most mental soundtrack. It was brilliant. It was constantly going from loud to quiet, from bass to treble. It was changing all the time. It was brilliant fun.
Deaf or not.
Yeah.
And that's where you can have impact in sound, is when you switch something off.
Yeah. The problem with that was it was completely not transmittable because it just didn't work on a TV.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff in the sound mix that I just had to leave to my mixer because I'm partially deaf, so I don't hear stereo. I don't know what that means. So there were times when he was really excited about panning, and I just, no idea what was going on. So he might have done it, he might not.
All directors do that.
I've got no idea.
I have no moments with panning.
Really? Have you done that? So it could be an elaborate lie. I have no idea. I don't know.
And Kate, you were saying that with the natural history, I was surprised you saying that it's still virtually completely mute that you get, because I thought that these days they did go out and I believed it.
So. No, it is. They are almost all the big, Life, Africa, Planet Earth, everything. They come completely mute.
You don't even get kind of location references.
In fact, the best bit, the only bit of sound that I usually get from those sort of films is when they've done the making of, and they have a sound recorder set there. So there's a little bit when David Attenborough is out there, or whoever's out there, and the sound recorder's there, and you hope that while they're there, could you just pick up a few of the animals around there? But so, lions,
Part of the big problem is logistics. In that, if you're filming these things, either you're filming on a very long lens, in which case you could film a lion eating something from 100 meters away, but one grasshopper between you and it, and the sound's completely added.
But there is a little bit of a thing. I mean, because there are mics on cameras, and I've had ones when they've almost accidentally recorded sound, and you go, could you accidentally record a bit more? But what tends to happen is the camera will that's the first thing that goes, there seems to be a microphone on this, we don't want that. So that goes, and I'm always struggling out, and I'm very lucky, and what I suggest all producers do is talk to a sound editor before you go out, because there are times on location there'll be sound that's, there'll be places there's never been to, locations no one's ever seen. They go, if no one's seen them, then they wouldn't have heard them either. So could you possibly go and get some sound? And most of the stuff I do, a lot of it's by accident. People are getting better, and especially if they've talked to me first, I said, please go and record stuff. Also, make logs. Otherwise, it's just a whole lot of tracks with numbers on it.
So you definitely prefer to have stuff to listen to?
I do. I mean, although I can recreate lots of stuff, and I've got a huge library, but if you've got the real sound, either I can have that as a reference, or there's I can clean stuff up and I can make it better. I can make it work. So
also with natural history, I mean the letter writers make train spotters look like the most laid back people you've ever met, because the one thing we can't fake with Foley or whatever is you can't fake the calls. Those have got to be right, because people know and people write in. If you get the wrong bird,
I've become an expert for about 3 weeks in kind of whatever animals I happen to be doing. And they have to be right, which is absolutely fair enough. There are times when things are being shot and it's miles away and there's not a single bit of sound. And I have to be just a little bit careful, but you find something that, if it works. I mean, that's the other thing with sound, is a little bit subjective. You kind of hear what you feel you should hear. So my job is to make it sound how you want it to sound and how you feel it ought to be. But there's a little, there's
the thing that happened a couple of years back, where there was sort of shock horror in the Daily Mail are there any Daily Mail reporters here? There was shock horror in the Daily Mail because the BBC had filmed a polar bear in a zoo, and we were all being deceived, and the BBC should be disbanded immediately. Thank God they don't know about the sound.
No,
because
I find that something terrifying.
That's going to come as a real shocker when they get that one.
Yeah, don't tell anyone.
I mean, a long time ago, you've probably all seen the thing where killer whales swim up on the beach and grab seals. And the first time the BBC filmed that, they actually did record a killer whale beaching itself. But it was rubbish. I mean, Miss Marple tripping on the Rectory Drive was a bigger crunch in the gravel than that was. It was pathetic.
That's why you have to have sound.
But the other thing was
to match the picture.
Yeah, well, that's right. The pictures are also not exactly. It's telephoto, it's slow-mo, and it's also, there's 2 weeks' behaviour cut into 8 minutes. So it's pretty intense, and the sound needed to match that. And, we set to with all sorts of bits of pieces. We had, spaceship rumbles and sound of a hovering Harrier jump jet, loads of stuff. So when they come out of the sea, and we sort of wondered, have we gone a bit far? But the guy that filmed it was actually in town when we were mixing it, and he came in to look at it, and we played it to him, and I said, "Does it sound like that?" And he said, "No, not at all." But watching it in here on a TV, hearing it sort of loud on a big screen, makes me feel exactly like I felt when I was on the beach. I thought,
And that is
okay,
a lot of what you're
then,
doing. You're
then we're doing it
compressing,
right.
you know,
because
a big long shoot, you know, for any sort of documentary, a big long shoot, which has been compressed into that, and that's kind of what you're doing with the sound, all the feeling, all the excitement. You're trying to get into, say, like a 2-minute sequence. And that does mean there is a bit of artifice.
That spotting session that you have with the production when you first start and everything, then is a really good time to actually bring out various nuances that sometimes you point out things they actually hadn't noticed, and then you can actually sort of bring them out in the sound and sort of direct people's eyes within the picture. Sometimes they don't want you to do that and you have to take it out, but it just opens up so many more sort of possibilities.
People, you know, the producer, it's the producer director, it's their film. You know, I'm there just to add to it.
Those sequences, I mean, though you would argue that the sound wasn't accurate, what it did do is it gave people a sense of actually momentarily looking up from their oven-ready pizza and actually experiencing this thing. And I mean, going back to sort of the subject of the debate, it didn't sound like in the studio. That had to sound so over the top in the studio so that it was convincing on TV sets. But it worked big time because everybody was saying, you know, it was a sort of...
It sounds like how it felt.
Yeah, exactly. So people get a sense that they've actually been there for a moment as opposed to at the pizza.
The reason that I included the horses clip in there is because that is the complete opposite of what these two guys do. With that, Liz Merman only wanted apart from the music, only wanted any audio that was actually recorded on the location to be in the film. And so we had to get sort of quite creative. And the whole premise of the film was sort of a racehorse, its life through sort of its eyes and everything. But that's why we were using loops in there to sort of get that repetitive idea of what they're doing every day and to sort of keep coming back to that and sort of have a sort of motif running through the film. And at times I was going, can I just no. But it was great. I mean, it's sometimes quite good to have sort of, you know, various parameters to work within, and you sort of surprise yourself by sort of how it all turns out.
It becomes music in its own way. It's sort of music concrète, but
yes, yeah.
But it's no less
so
tonal than a sitar.
It's always worth getting something because you don't know quite how that can then sort of feed in as well. Is any questions? So, yeah?
Yeah, you mentioned before about doing different. You mentioned before about recording mixes theatrical. So the two things I wonder are how much difference there is between those four mixes. Are we talking small amounts, or are we talking about spending an extra day on every mix? And also, then what order you doing those in?
Order-wise, it's quite simple in that you start with the biggest one and get smaller. So you start with the one that's got the most channels, you're looking ahead to if this Dolby Atmos. Does anybody know about Dolby Atmos? Have you heard about Dolby Atmos? Dolby Atmos is Dolby's new venture into stereo, into surround, where there's just speakers everywhere. You know, normally you sit there and then you've got your screen and you've got your left, centre, right, and then you've got a few at the back. These, they come down the side walls all the way to the front, and then there's 2 rows up the ceiling. It's mental. It sounds absolutely brilliant.
It does work.
And I can't wait. I've had a little play, actually. And
that will end up being the biggest at the moment.
Yeah,
the biggest
but
thing,
so what you don't want to do is start off with your sort of YouTube clip and try and make that work in Atmos, because it's not going to work. Whereas it is much easier to start with the big complicated thing and lose the elements you don't need. I mean, so the huge rumbles that, you know, when you're sat in a movie theatre and spaceships go over or whatever, and you get that sort of really sexy bass thing, it's not going to come out of this, ever. So that can go. But it's easier to have it there and then lose it. So in terms of the order you do things, definitely start with the biggest, loudest, most complicated one and boil it down.
And when you're actually conceiving of a film as well, not rely on too much on devices like the Rumble and everything to take you through a film if you're then going to be sort of selling it on downloads as well, because just sort of think of alternative ways which the film is going to work and you're going to get the message across.
But are you then doing the SNR mix for
yeah.
Ideally, Yeah,
Yes.
but the problem is, as I was saying earlier, you don't know what people are going to listen, what mobile device they're going to listen to it on. So if they're going to listen to it on the built-in speaker in an iPhone streaming off YouTube, I don't know if it's even worth bothering. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, I'm not going to start quoting to productions. I think we need to do a mix for internal iPhone speaker, because they're just going to say, right, you've gone too far now, go away. 10.1, they've got to 9.1.
Got 9.1 and 11.
Thing is, the numbers start to get a bit silly, because Atmos...
That's what's going to take over. Well, I mean, there's a thing called Aura as well, which is trying to compete with Dolby, but I'm not sure that's going to get through.
I think the smallest spec for Atmos is something like 28.2. And you're not going to put that in your house. I'm not going to put that in my house. My wife won't let me. Even if I could afford it, I wouldn't. Buy your shares in JBL now.
And there are not going to be that many places that can play it.
No, I think it's got 5.1 and 7.1 seems to be for theatrical.
I think there was a question at the back there. A couple of questions at the back.
Hi. Yeah, my question's about kind of a pre-dub mix, really. So I've had a very lucky week. I've been making a film in Abbey Road in Studio 2, which is a fantastic place to record sound. And the first film I need to deliver for my client is industry only, so it's going to be a short promotional film about an album that I'll send to places like The One Show and The Guardian newspaper, that type of thing. And after that, I'm going to do a full dub, which will be fantastic because I have the mixes back from the producer. Unfortunately, though, I need to get this promotional film about the album for a press release out before the record producer will have finished mixing. So I'm going to be working at home on Final Cut. Now, I'm mainly a cinematographer, so I don't know a lot about sound. The kind of techniques I use at the moment is, obviously to stop it distorting, to get it around, is it between 6 and 12 dB, I think it needs to be, is that right? And then I tend to export the audio and I look at it to kind of see if it looks healthy, so to make sure there's a lot of dynamics in it and it's not too flat. But I just wondered if there's any other advice, just on a basic level, when people are trying to do a pre-mix on their own Final Cut. Is there anything else I should look for? Digital mixer, is that a piece of software? Or? Oh, hardware, expensive. Well, I've got Logic, so I could export to Logic maybe and do it in there. Do you think that would be a better way of doing things?
I think it depends how far you're trying to go.
It also depends how confident you are and how much time you've got to play as well. Because the more box of tricks you have sort of within Logic or within Pro Tools, the more you can actually mess it up. And I think the thing is exactly, how much time you've got to play. But also, my advice for everything sort of is just to keep it as clean and as uncomplicated as possible, and just sort of let everything sort of work to itself rather than sort of getting sort of trying to do too much. Just let the sound that you've got actually work within it and keep it nice.
Yeah, I would say definitely keep it simple. And if you can sort of identify, well, if you've got some idea of where most people are likely to view it, obviously if it's going for broadcast, then there are some sort of specs that have to be adhered to. If it's going to be distributed to execs who are probably going to watch it on laptops and iPads and stuff like that, then I wouldn't be too subtle, because that's sort of wasted. So try and identify where it's going to be, how it's actually going to be listened to, and then try and monitor it with that when you actually make the mix. Play it on a few different devices, see what the tweaks are making, or radically get a sound person to do it. I've got my card. If you want. Yeah. But you're just doing a guide.
Yeah, if you know who it's going to go to, have a word with them, because quite often I will do premixes of something, because it's good, because it gives me a chance to actually have a look at it before I do it anyway. So, you know, if you go with somebody
So
friendly.
I do that. I'm a
Yeah.
sender to sometimes they, I'll do a whole lot of tracks and they just want to look at it and have it in the cutting room. So I'll just do just stereo. Nothing's panned. But I do have to warn them, this cannot go anywhere else apart from the cutting room. If you start sending it off and it starts being played in cinemas, this is not going to work. So you just got to be really careful where it goes. And almost want to
Having received those from Kate, I can say volumes can go down as well as up.
Yeah. I like them quite loud. It's for the cutting, that's what I mean. If it goes anywhere else, it will completely
it's sort of standard practice on the sort of bigger budget movies. I mean, we did that on the Cats film, for example. Before they'd even finished editing, we did a mix. It wasn't a full-on mix. It was just a couple of days, but we bashed it through so that it could be it could be viewed by execs, it could be viewed, actually they do a test screening with members of the public, and also just the production team can actually go to a cinema, only a little one, but they go and sit down and watch it in a real world actual environment for where it's intended to be shown, and that actually is very revealing for everything, not just the sound, but it reveals stuff about the pace of the edit, which shots work, which shots don't, and the shot which you're editing on a couple of, even if you've got a couple of 40-inch TVs in your edit suite, but when you blow it up onto an 8-meter screen, you think, flipping heck, that's a shaky shot, because it's now going up and down a foot,
Or it feels too short.
You mentioned YouTube, so actually if I think about it, the final delivery, really, after my dub and everything, it's because it's for Warner Music, it's not for BBC or anyone, so it will actually be YouTube. So I mean, is there things we need to consider for that? Try uploading our own versions of it first and listen to that on different devices. Maybe that would be a good way, because I imagine it'll suffer some compression, which would, like you say, lose subtleties perhaps.
There is the issue of compression. There is also the issue, I would say, if you're doing it specifically for upload to YouTube, of wasted bandwidth and everything as well, where you're actually sort of taking up some of your energy of your signal and stuff that is never going to be heard and everything, which is sort of when a mix would come in and actually sort of bin out the stuff that you're not going to do, and that'll actually make the rest of it a lot clearer and everything anyway. So, but it's good to know where it's going, but don't mean that because you're going to listen to it eventually on a laptop doesn't mean that you necessarily mix it on a laptop. Part of the reason, even when sort of mixing for TV, you tend to mix in studios which are far higher spec than anybody's TV, is to hear the stuff that you can't hear through a TV. But if somebody's got a really good system, then they're going to. And it's to weed all of that stuff out as well and just clean it all up.
Well, I'd say there aren't really any actual rules. Broadcasters have a delivery spec, just as there's a Dolby spec for cinemas, and there's stuff which is going to work if it's on YouTube, and there's stuff which isn't going to work. And sometimes the specs actually make it worse. I mean, we've got a thing now where they're all getting everybody's getting terribly aroused by perceived volume metering, and they all want to get into this loudness metering thing, which is fine. They need to apply it with a rod of iron to the commercials people rather than the actual programs, but they don't really take into consideration what the thing's about. So you could be doing a wildlife thing about leopards hunting at night, which is going to be a fundamentally pretty quiet show. And that has to have the same average volume as if Red Bull want to make a documentary about base jumping. And you know that that's going to be sort of relentless heavy rock, wind noise, and guys going, woo! Lots of complicated buddy high fives. I'm far too English for that. But it's got to be the same volume, and a lot of this comes from the States, where, are there any Americans here? Okay. In the States, they've got this problem with analog cable, and the problem is if you've got if you've got the Red Bull base jumping and motorbike racing program on one channel, and someone is watching the adjacent channel, which is about cats hunting at night, you can hear it, just as in the cinema, you can hear 300 through the wall when you're trying to watch Woody Allen have some angst. They actually get breakthrough between the channels. So that's why they're trying to contain the loudness.
I think there was a
You can have too many rules. Is the problem.
I think there's one there and one there and one there.
I'm sorry.
I'm curious about, say, if you're working on a movie feature which uses a lot of old archive, say like music footage or something like that from the 70s, but it's a feature release. What kind of goes on to make old archive sound, which is restricted, make it sound better if it's going to be in a cinema that's
the dreaded digitally remastered.
What?
Or the dreaded thing that you see on CDs that says digitally remastered. They just copied it. And usually turn the treble up, I think is what they do. That's what they did to Dark Side of the Moon. The first thing I would normally do, if I've got a load of archive which is going into anything, is I would try and get rid of anything that wouldn't have been there originally. So if something was originally, for example, if it's shot on film in the 30s, 40s, 50s, it will have been an optical print. There's a thing called an Academy filter, which I can't quite remember the numbers for, but basically there won't be anything above about 5K at all. Simply won't be there. But the problem is if you put that, when they take that to a modern telecine and transfer it onto tape, the modern telecine's got a much better frequency pickup, so it picks up all this stuff that wouldn't ever have been there. So the first thing I'll do is just get a shot of all that, and it's amazing how that will improve it. I think what you're getting at is that people want to take that recording from years ago and make it sound modern. I think.
Or acceptable.
Or just acceptable. Well, certainly, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do to clean stuff up, and there's some unbelievably good plugins and what have you these days for audio restoration.
That is where the kind of software is.
Yeah, some of the tricks you can do with things like Isotope and Cedar and these kind of things, unbelievable. I mean, you can't believe how much cleaning up you can do. Not that it means you can go out and just record any old crap and we'll sort it out later.
But again, if you have gone out and recorded something, don't immediately think, oh, sort of something went wrong in the shoot and it's just completely unusable. Sort of send it to whoever's going to be doing your mix, because we can do quite a bit these days that we couldn't do before. And
Still can't really get rid of reverb though. So
no, we
get
can
the mic near them. That's the holy grail. That one.
Yeah.
But I think if my personal preference, if you've got archive, would be to make it sound as good as it would have been, but not to try and make it any better. Some things are best left how they were. A slightly different tack, but I did a thing a few years back for the BBC, which was a documentary about the Beatles, and they had it was the story of it was that there was a guy who was a young cine enthusiast. He was like 14 or something, and he had a cine camera, and he lived just around the corner from Candlestick Park, which is where the Beatles played their last ever gig. And he went and sat in the stand when they set up and filmed it. Just filmed the rehearsal and filmed them building the set and stuff like that, because they didn't have health and safety and stuff in those days, and he just did it. Mute, but that's what he did. And this stuff had come to light, so they made a program out of it, and they cut some of that footage together with existing concert footage, and also a load of, turns out John Lennon was a bit of a cine enthusiast, and he would film on the plane when they were flying off on tour, and he'd taken Aunt Mimi along, and it was just extraordinary stuff. And it was all cut together using either concert audio or just off the records. And, we did what we did, and it sounded fine. Part of the point of the film was that the Beatles stopped playing live because nobody could hear what they were doing, because PA technology hadn't got there. Apparently they would have, like Ringo was on his own. He just had to bash the drums as hard as he could. And in a football stadium, that's a big ask, especially for Ringo. What's the quote that, he might not have been the best drummer in the world. In fact, he wasn't actually the best drummer in the Beatles. The guitar amps, there were two 30-watt Vox amps on the stage, and the vocals went to the tannoy system in the stadium. That's how they played those gigs, because they hadn't got the big PAs. So we made this whole film, and it sounded pretty good. It sounded sort of authentic 60s concert footage. We had the excuse of being able to bury it a bit. The comedy was that there was also a version for the States, and they didn't have clearance to use the Beatles because of the whole thing with Apple Records. So So they didn't. So the international versions, they got rid of the Beatles and they replaced it with sound-alike off library music. And if you look at the user comments on Amazon.com of the film called The Unseen Beatles, they're pretty critical because it hasn't got any Beatles in it. Extraordinary. Yeah. The UK one's good. The Unheard Beatles, yeah. It's actually better with the sound off.
What's it about? Well, no, exactly. I mean, I know it's a facetious question to throw back, but yeah, it sort of really depends on whether it's sort of such a simple interview or how much you want to get in. So yeah, you can go.
So you like track laying for sort of sorting out. Yeah, I mean,
it does slightly depend on what it's about.
90 minutes is still a long, it's still a chunk of time. I think anything less than...
For sound editing?
A week or so for 90 minutes. I mean, it depends what's in there. If it was just wall-to-wall interviews and that, it'd be quite quick. But me, I haven't had an assistant for a long time. I don't have an assistant.
Depends on the budget.
Yeah, I mean, it hugely does depend on the content. So if it was just straight interviews, like a sort of South Bank show style talking heads thing.
And it depends on how well the interviews are recorded as well, how much cleaning you up you have to do, and how much you actually want to sort of edit those interviews, depending on how good your interviews are, where there's not much to cut out from them, just sort of little clicks and pops and everything. As you say, because I mean that could take quite a while, just getting all of the sync sounding nice before you actually can then add anything to it.
Yeah. Do it in a sound edit by the sound editor rather than do it in the dub. And that's also a bit of a problem. There's a kind of what I call wash and go, which is it goes straight from the picture edit straight into dubbing theatre.
Which is fine if the programme has got David Dickinson in it.
And it's all perfect and there's nothing wrong with sound. All the joins work brilliant and that's great. But you can be sat in a dubbing theatre, which will always cost more than the sound editing room, fixing little gaps. No one's put fill in, no one's sorted out the dialogue, no one's done anything, and it will cost more.
The other thing, I forget your question, was that for cinema or for TV? Because right. I mean, as an example, the Cats film that we showed those clips of, that was 12 weeks of sound edit?
12 weeks, yeah. I mean,
but that was 12 man weeks.
So 14 in the end.
14, okay, so 14 man weeks of sound editing.
Person weeks.
Person weeks.
That is, yeah.
You had a sex change to do it, didn't you?
Yeah. Kate by day, Tim by night. And then the mixing, we had 3 weeks of pre-mixing, and it was a 2-week final mix, and then another 4 days to do the delivery stuff.
Yeah, I mean, simplest, I would say.
Sponsored by Disney.
Sort of a week, but on an average sort of 90-minute doc that I would do, you would be sort of, taking, say, 3-4 weeks for the sound edit.
Yeah.
Slightly depends how deep your pocket is. Or
I think there's a limit to it. I mean, if you take two...
Yeah, I mean, we would go on like forever.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is a limit, and I think even I'd know when to stop. But I think if you you don't leave enough time for tidying up, it's just not going to sound good. I know, well, that's the problem. Yeah. And sometimes people haven't even thought their sound editor was needed at all, which I find a bit shocking, obviously, me being one. But as I said, it's cheaper sorting it out before we get into the dubbing theatre. Because the dubbing theatre is always more expensive than...
Okay, is that it for questions? I think we're pretty much out of time. Okay, well, thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you.